Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our Center Director, Dr. Maha Leia B. Ronald.
To our distinguished speaker, Dr. Ronald Mendoza, and Undersecretary for Strategic Management, the Department of Education. We're also very lucky to have today Ms. Sonia Rocco and other guests. To our officials and colleagues here at INNOTECH, to our partners and colleagues in education, our regulars, thank you very much. And to all participants joining us online and in person, good afternoon, magandang hapon sa ating lahat. Welcome to today's seminar entitled Broadening the PPP Horizon, DepEd Perspective. This conversation comes at an important time for Philippine basic education as the country continues to confront persistent infrastructure and resource gaps while also seeking more innovative, sustainable, and future-ready approaches to learning delivery. Under the leadership of Secretary Sani Angara, the Department of Education's Public-Private Partnership or PPP agenda is entering a new and ambitious phase. From news report, this PPP modality has delivered more than 13,000 classrooms, and the next phase seeks to construct more than 16,000 additional classrooms. Yet the scale of need remains significant. EDCOM2 report underscored that the classroom shortage could reach 219,000 by 2028, if not urgently addressed. Alongside this are continuing gaps in school electrification, internet connectivity, and access to digital learning devices. This points to a broader shift in how private partnerships are being utilized in the education sector. PPPs are also becoming platforms for improving access, strengthening system resilience, expanding digital inclusion, and supporting more equitable learning opportunities. This also gives today's discussion a wider regional relevance. The scale, modality, and ambition of DepEd's emerging PPP agenda invite us to reflect on how education partnerships in Southeast Asia can be designed not only to respond to immediate shortages, but also to support long-term transformation in the education sector. As the government increasingly shapes education through subsidies, procurement, PPPs, and digital systems, the design of these mechanisms becomes critical. Well-structured partnership can help ensure that public resources generate broad social value, that private sector participation remains transparent and responsive to national priorities, and that education markets develops in ways that are fair, competitive. I have just come from an international competition network conference and aligned, of course, with development goals. In education, partnership must ultimately serve learners. It must advance inclusion, strengthen institutional capability, and contribute to learning, to long-term transformation in a sector, the education, that is central to equity, productivity, and nation building. This direction resonates strongly with INNOTECH's vision. By 2035, INNOTECH will be a leading force in empowering learners into the change makers of tomorrow. For us, this means supporting education systems that do more than expand access. They must enable learners to thrive, lead, innovate, and contribute meaningfully to their communities and to the wider Southeast Asian region. It is therefore fitting that we are joined today by Usec Ron, whose leadership in strategic management and reform offers valuable insight into how partnerships can be designed not only to close gaps, but to build future-ready learning systems. So together, through purposeful and well-designed partnerships, we can create learning systems that are more inclusive, resilient, and responsive to the future and help drive innovation in education. Again, good afternoon, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce the Honorable Undersecretary for Strategic Management of the Department of Education, Dr. Ronald U. Mendoza. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, President Ravago, Lordy Chris. Magandang hapon po to Mrs. Rocco, Prof. Gina, all of our colleagues who are in attendance today. Um, I come bearing good news and slightly challenging news as the life of DepEd goes. Just this morning, the volcanic eruption in Albay of our classrooms, 573 minor damage, 212 major damage, 191 totally damaged. And this is just a typical Monday or Tuesday in DepEd in terms of what happens to our system. We are tasked to administer 47,972 schools in the Philippines, 1.2 million staff, 900,000 plus teachers in our system. We are always reminded that we are riding on the largest budget of the department in its entire history, which we are very grateful for and which we promise we will exert every level of good governance to try and channel and use these resources very well. But I will be very candid with you as head of strategic management of DepEd, which is a new unit actually in DepEd, and tell you now that we are only beginning to make a dent on the investments necessary to boost our education system in the country. And probably the best way to make an even bigger dent is to leverage the resources of the private sector also, so that the resources channeled by the public sector can be compounded, augmented, further strengthened by the expertise and further resources of the private sector. So without further ado, I will talk to you about what I've been working on in DepEd in the past 1 year and 10 months. It's now our first year and 10 months in office. So for those of you who are thinking of turning around such a big ship as DepEd, let me share some good news that some of it is already turned around and headed in the right direction. With enough gas, with enough resources, we will probably get there sooner rather than later. PPPs is one of those strategies. And we thank the President and SecRC and the economic team for actually channeling these resources and guiding us in part of this strategy. In fact, I will give credit where credit is due. Si SecRC po ang nagtulak ng PPP sa amin, sabi, you can complement your conventional procurement by actually resuscitating PPPs in DepEd, which we have not used for 13 years. The last PPP in DepEd was in 2013-2014, 11,000 plus classrooms produced. Our first PPP in DepEd under the Marcos administration, approved in early January of this year, is good for 16,000 classrooms in one wave. We are working on an additional 40,000 classrooms if we could have the continued support of the economic team so that we can make a little bit of a dent. The total classroom deficit of the country is 165,000 classrooms, not counting those damaged by volcanic eruptions and typhoons. So that is also sort of a moving target. So just to give you a bit of a background, which I mentioned already, PPPs, public-private partnerships, is not a new modality in Department of Education. It was first deployed around 13 years ago, and it produced this many classrooms during the Aquino II administration. There are many lessons learned from this modality, but some of the key ones, some are quite mundane, such as securing the procurement of independent consultants. It took a while for the first independent consultant to be secured because this was the first time DepEd was using such a modality. We need high caliber independent consultants who can actually do the work. Increase capacity for site validation. For those of you who are familiar with how we do infra in DepEd, we need to map the schools. We need to make sure that there is buildable space for where we can plant the classrooms. And if there is no buildable space, we will need to knock down existing buildings and classrooms. And some of them, I've just been back from Basilan actually 2 days ago. Some of them are literally falling apart already and need to be knocked down in the interest of safety of our kids. And for places like Barn, there is an even bigger challenge of building school buildings and classrooms because you probably heard the latest news from the Philippine Statistics Authority that we will likely become an aging nation by 2030, around 10 to 15 years earlier than initially projected by the economists. And the only part of our country that is still young and will continue to produce more young people is Barn. So it is incumbent upon us to keep channeling resources into that part of the country because one day that region will carry us when we are all old. So yan po yung importance ng Barn sa atin. This is the overall game plan, and Sexani always reminds me, Usec, make sure that you manage expectations every time you show this game plan. And I said, well, as former head of planning in DepEd, it has since been taken out of my portfolio so I can focus solely on PPPs. I said, it's good to convey the plan and then show to all of our stakeholders that some of this will be done during our watch and some of it will be done hopefully as we continue a good plan, right? But we must have a plan, a narrative, right? And not just shoot for, okay, let's do what we can until middle of next year. That's not the way to do it, right? That's not the way to make a dent. So our plan right now and what we inherited, what the Marcos administration inherited, is a classroom deficit of 165,000 classrooms. 165,000 times 40, that's the number of kids that are now being processed in multiple shifts, sometimes starting at 5 a.m. and ending at 8 p.m. in highly urbanized areas. This is the concentration of young people in our system. What we will try to do is build enough classrooms and learning areas for them so that they don't need to be in this very draconian environment of multi-shifting. The first strategy is PSIP 3 and 4. Oops. Still haven't figured out how this works. Okay. This is actually it's PSIP 3, 4, and 5. Aquino 2 had PSIP 1 and PSIP 2 for a total of 106,000 classrooms. I always get some looks from my secretary every time I describe that plan. It's more likely that we have a fraction of this achievable given the tight budget that we are in. But with enough political will, it could be continued by the next administration. And hopefully we'll do as much as we can in this administration. The other one is a conventional procurement, of course. This one. Oops. Okay, I will just point it out. That one over there. Conventional procurement is the traditional way of procuring classrooms. If you are aware of how we do our bids and awards committees, it's usually 5 or 7 classrooms per bids and awards committee, which takes anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. So you can see the advantage of doing PPPs in tranches of 16,000, 13,000, 18,000. At worst, we will break that up into 3 or 4. So, ang kalaban po is 5 or 8 classrooms per bids and awards committee doon. On this side, it will be 15,000, 16,000, 18,000, much more efficient. The PPPs also allow for scale. And we are trying to attract AAA contractors, quadruple A contractors, in order to participate and boost competition and drive down prices and increase quality in our classrooms building. You can imagine that for a bids and awards committee, maybe there is only one bidder sometimes, and it's only for 5 to 8 classrooms. So how much innovation will you really put into that kind of a project? It's also very localized, not exactly the spark point for major innovations in infrastructure. But we are trying to augment that. We're not going to stop that. That's actually one of our, we call this in DepEd, ito po yung mga kabayo. These are the horses. And what we are trying to do is drive this horse race towards the best modalities to produce the classrooms in the least cost and in the fastest time possible. So between the two will be a major chunk of the requirement. Donations account for something like, 2,000 between 2025 to 2028, hopefully continued into the next administration. Our partners there include um, Angat Buhay, Metrobank Foundation, Jollibee Foundation, and so on and so forth. Donations are good, but they're not exactly going to move the needle as far as the total classrooms need is concerned. The expansion of vouchers, which is now progressing, this is actually one of the more promising ways, cost-effective ways of increasing access to high-quality education. First of all, private sector schools on average tend to score higher in terms of learning outcomes. So moving a child from the public sector on average to the private sector on average is seen as an improvement. Right? Meanwhile, you'll have any number of private schools with only, for a classroom of for 40 kids, only 15 kids, 18 kids. The voucher allows for us to tap those chairs, those resources, which do not really increase in a major way the cost of the private sector component, but opens the door to high quality education to some of our public school students. So the goal here is actually not to replace the public sector. The goal is to strengthen the public sector, meanwhile, in a very cost-effective way, tap the private sector advantages which are already there. Sayang po na kulang yung mga bata nila. If we just allocate some resources, we can actually tap those chairs and give them an immediately better environment. And if they leave a congested classroom, those who are left behind also get a better education. So it's two wins, right? Before you had 60, 70, I've been to schools and talking to a principal who said in our classrooms up to 60 to 70 students in the classroom. Yes, in Barnpo, in Basilan. So if you actually try to move some of the kids outside, then it is a big advantage. Even those left behind will have a better learning experience. So here, 4+1 blended learning is one of the innovations we're trying to explore and possibly ramp up. So if you see any number of class cancellations during the typhoon season or during volcanic eruptions, 4+1 means 4 days face-to-face and 1 day you are actually learning with your teacher online. So the device is brought home by the young people and they are able to continue their learning with this device. The most recent scientific evidence and practice from other countries is it's better to have that system in place and then ramp it up during a pandemic or a volcanic eruption or a typhoon, rather than have zero systems in place and then have to set that up during the crisis itself. So the idea is you're doing 4+1, and we're going to show with empirical evidence that you will not become a second-class learner in the system. So with better pedagogy and better training for our teachers, sensitization for our students, you will still be able to compete with those who are 5 days face-to-face. Meanwhile, if you are living in an area that is at high risk of shocks, then that 4+1 can immediately be ramped up to 3+2 or 2+3. And therefore, they are now used to that system and demonstrate the self-discipline to use the technology properly. Leasing or acquisition is another new thing. So there are many new things now being explored in DepEd, and we're proud to say the goal is to, once the evidence is there, to push scale. Not 1,000 flowers, but there's only 3 schools there that do it, 2 schools here, 1 school there. The goal is if you prove that it is a cost-effective and very promising intervention, then we will absorb in the system and ramp it up, right? So leasing or acquisition is one of those strategies where it's a no-brainer as far as economists are concerned. There are many schools, private schools that closed down after the pandemic and never really opened up again. So here we are, busy building more and more classrooms because we're catching up with 165,000 classrooms, right? Gap. And we discovered that Development Bank of the Philippines has 5 schools closed in its books and no one wants to acquire them. It's sitting in their assets, it's not being leased, and it's not being acquired. Now we are going to explore either lease or acquisition of closed schools so that we're able to put them into service quickly. In as little as 6 to 8 months, we can put a closed school into service, which is a lot faster than conventional procurement that takes about 3 to 4 years to complete, and still a lot faster than PPP, which takes about 1 to 2 years to complete. The first leased school in the entire history of the Department of Education was last December, before Christmas, when we opened our Pila Laguna lease for 7 classrooms, with the full support of the local community, the Parent Teachers Association, and of course the students who were all too happy to start studying without the multiple shifting in their new school. And that was really a demonstration of how local government partnership and local community partnerships can play a big, big role in addressing many of our challenges. I was talking to one of the parents whose child was now going to the leased school. And I was expecting any number of benefits, like better learning, or now she could do better in school, blah, blah, blah. And his main benefit that he shared with me was his child, who is a girl, right? He is no longer concerned that she's going home at 8 p.m. at night, and she can go home and have dinner with them, with the family. That was the main takeaway of this parent, right? Something as basic as this, we are depriving many, many learners because of the lack of investments. And leasing and acquisition allows us to move very, very fast on this. Now, years from now, when I'm no longer in Department of Education, and this innovation falls into the wrong hands, it could actually be also abused. So let me start advocating for better governance on that starting today by saying leasing and acquisition must be done in close collaboration with the private sector, number one. And number two, we must develop that market space carefully and purposefully, which is what we're trying to do right now, because the first leases are going to be with our development banks, so that their army of lawyers and our army of lawyers will make sure that neither of us get into trouble. Before we go to the private banks, their army of lawyers and our army of lawyers, number two. And finally, and only then, will we go to the private sector, where any number of proponents can approach DepEd and offer properties for lease or for acquisition. I say this because one of my young focal points, all of 27 years old, got already bribed to consider a potential lease, 7 million pesos for someone who is earning only 50,000 pesos. So what we're doing is building good governance in Department of Education to avoid those types of malpractice and bad governance. And finally, I go to PPPs. For that, let me just quickly go through some of the advantages which I mentioned already. Conventional procurement, 2 to 3 years, but sometimes reaching 7 years to completion. I have been to a school where there were 4 contractors. Pinagpasa-pasahan po yung classroom, right? And you of course know that when you get it, you pass it on at a lower cost, and so there's less and less likelihood that you're actually building a high-quality classroom. Many governance reforms are now being put in place by Sec Sani and the reform team to lessen the likelihood of that kind of bad governance, starting with increased transparency in where we are putting our classrooms. So there is now a map, and also on the pricing of these classrooms. Public-private partnerships take only 1 to 2 years. Why? Because the incentives are aligned with completing the classroom and turning it over to DepEd as soon as you can. Why? Because PPPs are based on availability payments. Unlike conventional procurement that has a mobilization component to it, you win the contract, you immediately get a mobilization component. For PPPs, you are supposed to go and bid for a PPP contract in partnership with a bank or a financing partner. and front load those investments so that the government will pay you across a period of 10 years. This allows us to stretch our fiscal space and complete the classroom's scale up early in the game rather than late in the game. Meanwhile, when you win the contract and you start building the classrooms, you only get paid when you turn over to our principals a working classroom. If you have a turnover, an effective turnover, and we check all the boxes, okay, it's a working classroom, you get paid availability payments, and the availability payments span across 10 years, right? So the major advantage of this PPP modality is you're able to stretch the taxpayer peso, front load the investments because we needed those classrooms yesterday, and impose strong governance because any problem with that classroom popping up, we won't pay the availability payment until you fix it. Unlike conventional procurement. So that's sort of among the major advantages of this. There are now at least 3 PPPs pipeline, but I'll tell you now to manage expectations, we are having to recalibrate this as we go forward. No reform strategy is going to survive when it hits actual implementation. So it's been changing. PSIC 3 is still around 16,000 classrooms, but PSIC 4 has been broken up to PSIC 4A and PSIC 4B at this point. And the idea is to include Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao schools in PSIC 4A and PSIC 4B. PSIC 3 is concentrated in the highest deficit areas. And the high deficit areas are actually in Luzon. So you may ask, why did you favor Luzon in PSIC 3, Usec Ron? Why did you begin in that area? Well, Luzon is where the biggest shifting is, where the biggest classroom deficits are. And it's not very surprising because that's where export zones are, that's where our concentration of economic activity is. But we will soon get to Visayas and Mindanao with the rest of the PPPs. There is a new PPP I would like to talk about also, and since this talk is about innovation, there is a PPP called PSIC Connect that we are building on. So when Brother Armin and his reform team includes a very good friend of mine, Usec Mike Luz, who passed away unfortunately. By the way, quirk of history, I inherited this job. Mike was Undersecretary under Brother Armin, and he was in charge of these types of activities, innovation, planning, and all that. I am now also working on the same area. Mike was my boss in AIM when I repatriated in 2011, when I started teaching in the Philippines. And what they were working on then was PPPs in education still had not existed. So they had to innovate and introduce PSIC 1 and 2. The first PPPs focused on classrooms. What we're doing is scaling up that innovation, PSIC 3, 4, and 5. These are not innovative anymore. There will be innovations built into the classrooms, but based on tech, good infrastructure, heat-resistant builds, and so on and so forth. They will be part of the PPPs. The truly innovative PPP that we are now introducing into DepEd is called PSIC Connect, right? I'll talk a little bit about PSIC Connect. Before that, I just want to go through quickly what is the potential impact of PSIC 3. This is the PPP for classrooms. Reduction in classroom shortage in Luzon by 18%. This is just the 16,000 na nauna po, yung PSIC 3. Improved student classroom ratio from 1:50 to 1:39. That's a lot better. You can finally breathe in your classroom with that kind of a ratio. Transition to single shift schedule of 890,042 students. So I met one parent who was very happy that his kid was actually one of the 890,000. Makakauwi na po para mag-dinner on time yung bata. Hindi na po siya kinakabahan na baka may mangyari doon sa dalagitan niya on the way home. And she is studying in Laguna. Generates 11.47% economic return relative to its cost. By the way, PPPs, so if we are in an economic crunch right now, if you start building classrooms, over 100,000 classrooms spread across the country, it's the most inclusive pump priming you can ever put in place in this country. better than bridges, better than north-south rail, better than airports. This is the one that will be spread across the country because our 47,972 schools are spread across the country. So everyone will benefit from this kind of infra build-up. Plus, it is good for our future. It's the best investment we can make. Enhance quality and resilience of educational infrastructure. I mentioned we are trying to build new technology into our infrastructure. I am not an engineer, but I have learned a lot from leading this effort, but I'm just an economist. So some of the technology includes yung mga bubong po, pagka may typhoon, parang hindi pa rin. In places where there's liquefaction, the soil is very soft and flood prone. You'll need to drive down board piles in order to stabilize the foundations of the school. And in some places, we're going to consider heat resistant, heat resilient classroom builds because that's really what's happening to the world right now. It's becoming hotter and hotter. You can imagine yourself trying to study in a place where your kid is in a very, very hot classroom, right? Very difficult to expect higher science, math, and English scores in that kind of an environment. And finally, local economic stimulus and up to 250,000 jobs produced. And that's a very conservative estimate, right? If you actually build more than 100,000 classrooms spread across the country, that kind of economic stimulus is exactly what we need right now because of the crisis that we are also seeing unfold. So now I'm going to go to PSIP Connect and start to wrap up the lecture. PSIP Connect is a very ambitious, I don't know whether we call it an infrastructure build-up, but let's just say that's how we view infrastructure. It's not just classrooms, it's really wherever you are, you can continue to learn, right? That could be the future, and that's really where other countries are now taking their education systems, right? Meanwhile, for us, we're still on the ground floor of such a build-up. So if you go to any of our 47,972 schools, they have MOE to purchase connectivity from any of the large connectivity providers. Tatatlo lang naman po yan, yung fiber across the street, right? Pero isa-isa po sila. They purchase these things one by one based on their annual MOE. It is much better to actually consolidate that, give it to the three conglomerates for competitive bidding, and give government the best deal. Because we calculated and compiled the data that 21,000 of our 47,972 schools actually have fiber across the street. That's the status of their connectivity. So subscribing to a connectivity provider can dramatically ramp up the connectivity in these schools. What we're going to do with the 21,000 is bucket them into larger pieces so that the providers compete and give government the best deal. That's innovation number one, and that's what PSIP Connect is going to try to leverage. Second, PSIP Connect is also going to look at the devices that will be needed to make that connectivity operational. We will not expect that the kids will have laptops or phones that they can use. Some of them do have this, but for the most part, Department of Education must invest to make sure that there is equity in the access to connectivity and the internet, and of course to technology. So we're going to procure those gadgets. And rather than procure those gadgets through conventional procurement, which we have seen to have challenging governance, let me just be very polite about it, challenging governance conditions in the recent past. What we're trying to do is incorporate it into a public-private partnership. The reason for this is simple. If you are able to compile large amounts of gadgets that will be part of a PPP, if any of those gadgets fail, you can include that as a component of the availability payment. I require in my contract that if one of my teachers has a laptop that doesn't work tomorrow, you will replace that laptop within, ma'am, gano'n po ninyo gusto kabilis? 24 hours? Okay na po ba yan o gusto nyo? Some reasonable amount. Baka po kasi nasa isla eh. So bigyan naman natin sila ng konting wala pa naman tayong drone na ililipad yung laptop sa isla. Bigyan natin sila ng konting logistics build-up, but let's say a reasonable number of time that you don't have the connectivity because it broke down, but you will get a replacement. That thing that broke down will be incorporated into the contract so that the provider fixes it in the Philippines, producing Philippine jobs. So rather than conventional procurement, keep on importing this from some of our favorite neighbors in the region, it is better to, natatawa si sister, import once, yes, maybe, that's okay, in the build-up phase. But if anything gets broken, let's study this and start fixing this in the Philippines. And the people who will fix this, by the way, are our own high school students who need to figure out how to fix gadgets. Because when they fix these gadgets, they will be able to fix your electronic vehicle within years. And then they will be able to fix drones, and they will be able to fix other electronic products later. So that is also part of our ambition in PSIC Connect, to integrate the logistics here in the Philippines and in partnership with these investors to locate some of the manufacturing in the Philippines. So we are working with the economic team to include this in the plan. Imagine we're going to buy 900,000 laptops for teachers. And everyone from grade 4 to 12 will have access to connected device use. So I'm calculating roughly 5 to 8 million tablets or laptops. Right? So that's 5 to 8 million tablets or laptops at risk of bad governance if you do the normal way we do it, or much more transparent, much more competitive, and with industrial policy built in if it were a PPP. All of these PPPs goes through butas ng karayon po with the economic team. In addition to that, we expose it to our partners in academia, our partners in civil society, to explain to them what the game plan is, so that we're able to get more allies understanding what the reform is. So here, nationwide connectivity backbone and AI-ready EdTech is one of the outcomes. 2, strengthen foundation skills and future-ready graduates. And 3, economic competitiveness, employment, and citizens empowerment. These are the main objectives of PSIC Connect. Rather than break up the components of connectivity, access, and pedagogy into parts for conventional procurement, the goal here is to package this so that it's turnkey for DepEd. If you are a provider and you partner with a device manufacturer, which we have many, just to the north of Batanes po, marami po silang pinoproduce na device doon. Baka gusto po nila mag-produce na lang sa Pilipinas and create Philippine jobs. That is part of the goal. And then connectivity, you bracket the fiber across the street. And if you do not have fiber across the street, then you get low Earth orbit or other options. And by next year, based on our intelligence, there will be at least 2 options for low Earth orbit functional in the Philippines. So this is good timing for us also. Right now, there's only 1. And pretty soon, we expect a European provider and a provider from China also to join the international market. So hopefully that will drive down costs for low Earth orbit as well, for those islands and other places that do not have fiber across the street. And then you're actually going to bucket this with learning management system and EdTech, in which there are many EdTech firms in Europe, in the United States, even here in our part of the world, and even in places like India and Indonesia, that are very interested to expand their provision of services and partner so that they are able to bid for this kind of a PPP. So that's the goal. Now, let me just quickly share with you some of the accomplishments, even though we are still anticipating those types of PPPs. Which is why this is the future, which is why we need to ramp up and increase access. Khan Academy with AI is one of the big accomplishments of Sec Sani under his watch. We have introduced Khan Academy with AI in over, ano na po ito, kailangan nyo i-update, It's much more than 2,300 schools at this point. The target is really upwards of 5,000 schools by the time we end our term. And the reason for this, for those of you who are not familiar with Khan Academy with AI, it is a big, big help to our teachers. It helps deload them. Why? Because the technology allows them to gain access to a vast amount of information and helps them improve their lesson plan, their teaching strategy with this information access. So it was demonstrated to me, and again, I'm not an EdTech expert, but I'm the guy finding money for these types of investments. And it was therefore demonstrated to me. And one of the demonstrations for our teachers and for us in the senior staff, they asked the AI that is functional in Khan Academy, I want to teach this concept using this context and this part, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly the teaching plan for the next day emerges within seconds, right? That does not put any of our teachers off the hook. They still need to use their brains and they still need to sharpen that thing and make sure what the AI produced is the right and effective way to teach that concept. It just makes it easier. Think of your calculator. It doesn't mean you don't need to learn math. You still need to be able to multiply 1,236,000 blah 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 by 6 million blah blah blah. But you will do that in seconds with a calculator rather than doing it mano-mano. That is how we think of AI also. It does not get you off the hook in terms of being a good teacher. Without the AI and without the tech, you're still a good teacher. That's the goal. But you're a good teacher and we give you AI, you will be an even more powerful teacher for our learners. And in the way that it is being framed in other learning systems in other countries, if you are able to deload the teacher and give them time again, because that's what you lose when you do it mano-mano, you get time. Your objective must be to focus on those kids who are left behind in your classroom. That's where you put your EQ and IQ. That's where you put your remaining energy. We save 2 hours of your time from syllabus preparation or learning plan preparation. You use that 2 hours to make sure no one is left behind. So yun po yung goal nito pong kinds of investments. And I'm happy to share that already in schools they're using CAN. There's anecdotal evidence of increases in math skills by 70%. Large improvements in skills. And it's not just the teachers becoming more efficient, it's also the students becoming excited again to learn. And of course, they're being taught using computers, using tablets, using methods that actually incorporate learning as fun, enjoying learning. In the words of Sexani, we want to make learning enjoyable again. Because if you recall when we're all ex-youth po, maybe some youth still in the room, but most of us are ex-youth. What were the things that you really felt, I want to get up because I want to go to school and learn that? What were the conditions for those kinds of learning environments for you at a personal level? It was a good teacher who cared that you actually picked up what you learned. And second, the way that it was taught was engaging. And third, you were not sweating your head off in your classroom because it was the worst classroom of all time. So very basic stuff that we are fixing. Yeah. There's another set of innovations, not just Khan Academy, but our partners. This is a set of innovations being implemented by our partners in Ayala Group of Companies. This is high-touch, high-tech. To put this simply, high-touch, high-tech means you are deploying technology, but you are also investing heavily in our teachers. And in fact, that's the overall science emerging from other countries. Tech is not a silver bullet. Giving technology to kids who are not prepared for it will actually drive down their learning outcomes. They're going to regress. If they are not prepared, they don't have the self-discipline, and they will just do whatever they want with the tech, it's going to be a distraction. So you need a really capable teacher and effective tech, and a prepared learner group that will have strong foundational learning. So in fact, this morning, I was listening to the Minister of Education of Singapore, who was defending their AI plan in Singapore, how they're rolling this out. And it's as if he copied our strategy in DepEd. Uh, no one's laughing. I'm pleased to share that we may have been looking at the same evidence. And the idea is you do not introduce technology to young kids who are not strong in foundational learning. Kung hindi po makabasa, bakit ka pa mag-AI, bakit ka pa magla-laptop, Usec Ron? Hindi pa nga siya makabasa eh. Kung wala siyang self-discipline, bakit mo siya bibigyan ng tablet? They must have all these things, and that's what foundational learning is supposed to produce. They must also have heavy investments in the first key stage. All the educators in the room would understand that this is the key stage with the highest returns. In fact, the only returns higher than key stage 1 are the returns in the first 1,000 and 3,000 days. Your mother taking care of you and making sure you are well nourished even before you're born gives you the brain power and cognitive development na panglaban mo to actually be a productive member of society. That part is no longer fully part of DepEd, but we do sit in the EDC Council, and we're able to lobby that, well, by the time they get to DepEd, they're stunted. They're hungry. They lack nutrition. The building blocks of what we will turn them into is already in deficit by the time they go and join our school as kinder. Dapat po, bago pa sila pumunta ng DepEd, malakas na po yung investment na yun. And then when they go into DepEd, we are going to continue the investments and begin to progressively ramp up their capabilities. According to our plan right now, just like the Singaporeans, we will not introduce technology until grade 4. That's the plan right now. Meanwhile, kinder to just before grade 4 is strengthening foundational learning, making sure they can read, making sure they can write, making sure they can comprehend, making sure they can compute. You have no business getting a calculator, just like when I was being taught math. Don't give young Ron a calculator when he can't even do math properly yet. Tatawa rin siya, right? It's the same with AI. You must have the building blocks for accessing it effectively before you're given that kind of firepower, right? So until grade 4, and only in grade 4 will you be given this access to this type of technology, and even then it is ramped up progressively. The goal for PCIP Connect, just to give you a sense of why this is a different type of PPP, is a service-oriented outcome. Before, different PPPs, you need a functional airport, na IAWAN. You need a functional tollway, right? The ones that you have in SLEX and NLEX. For classrooms, you need a functional classroom. PCIP Connect is not a functional infrastructure. What we need is 1 hour of interconnected device use per week per child for every learner in the Department of Education from grades 4 to 12. That's the goal. Whoever can produce a coalition of service providers that gives us this contract, the contract is yours for 6 to 10 years. 1 hour of interconnected device use per week per child for every learner from grades 4 to 12. That's the standard. And it is a mindset change in DepEd. Rather than doing it ourselves, okay, Usec Ron, Usec Edson, Usec Malcolm, you will be in charge of Usec Malcolm purchasing computers. Usec Edson, you will be in charge of setting up the EdTech. Usec Ron, you will be in charge of making sure that this is training the teachers and making sure that this will all be consolidated. And one of the strengths of the private sector is precisely consolidating this kind of coordinated service. They're actually doing it already in the private sector. It's functional in the schools, in private schools. Why are we going to try and mimic this and take ourselves away from trying to improve our teaching? So we are not a tech firm. DepEd is not a tech firm. We are not an infrastructure firm. So we can bring in help on those areas, give them the appropriate return for this, and turnkey benefit from that kind of service provision. So that's the goal. And I hope Usec Mike is smiling from heaven at me right now. He passed away, unfortunately, about 4 years back. That we will match his innovation in 2013 and 2014 with this generation of innovations in Department of Education under our watch. So, just to give you some more things that guide us in terms of making an impact, again, the goal is learning outcomes, right? The goal is not to take pictures with tablets because they're cool and shiny, take pictures with classrooms because, all of those are meant to boost learning outcomes. If the learning outcomes do not improve, then all of those investments are for naught. So, how long you stay in school matters. That's the evidence out there in other countries. How much you learn in school matters more. For the time that you were exposed to education and the efficiency of that time, that's actually a more powerful lever of learning outcomes. So these are things that we have gathered as basically our, I should call them our guideposts for our reforms. And we're looking constantly at the evidence from other countries and from our own system. So in my group, strategic management group, SECSANI included a new unit called monitoring and evaluation. So that's going to be part of what we look at moving forward. Okay. Yeah. I'm not going to spend too much time on this in the interest of also engaging you in a Q&A after this, but a lot of evidence coming from outside on vertically integrated edtech solutions. What that just means is edtech is integrated in pedagogy, is integrated in learning management system, is integrated in access to gadgets, right? Sometimes we stop at access to gadgets. We do not test whether those gadgets are optimally used in the pedagogy so that they produce the best outcomes. That needs to be tested, trial and error. We can't just copy the Indians, we can't just copy the Singaporeans. We can't even just copy the Batangueños, and we can't just copy the Caviteños. Something that works in Basilan is going to be different from something that works in Ilocos Norte. So that kind of a system requires an all-new governance framework and thinking in Department of Education. Not one size fits all, constant testing and constant learning and constant upgrading of the way we do things. That's why monitoring and evaluation is so very important. Teaching at the right level, ito po yung grade 5 na yung student but can only read at grade 1 level but will nevertheless be taught what they need to read in grade 5. They need to be brought back to where they got off the train and got left behind. Build there and build them back that way. If you force a learner who is already up there in grade level to try, but was left behind, no? His or her skills was not at that grade level, that learner will lose heart. And that learner will drop off eventually because all that will do is show that you do not deserve to be at that level. You are incapable of absorbing. What is more frustrating, and you probably all felt this as young people, being taught something that you don't understand. I hope you all experience how bad that feels because that way you understand what we're working on in terms of teaching at the right level. Being taught something and being told something you don't understand and you were unable to figure it out. Take that to school with you, take that home with you, and you will eventually have a lot of dropouts. Because they don't catch up. And nothing is built for them to catch up with their peers. So this is now being explored and developed in various parts of the system. And the goal is to introduce this as part of the deloading. This is where you focus. The Aral Law, the learning remediation reform, that is one of the big reforms under the Marcos administration, is also founded on that philosophy. Do not leave the children behind. Because for one reason or another, they got off the train and you are forcing them into the wrong area. Nawala po sila ng grade 1 and then pinipwersa mo, pumasok ka ng grade 5 kasi yun yung age mo eh. Wala po silang napipick up. Kaya po, this is part of our hypothesis. They are dropping out. They're losing heart. They're just being exposed that they are incapable of picking it up. They might be subjected to bullying also because it's so obvious that they are not picking up the advanced stuff. And then they eventually lose interest. So we're going to try and end that and do right by them. That's part of that reform. And finally, structured pedagogy. I am not really an education expert, but the way it was explained to me is that you must also improve on the pedagogy of Department of Education and use a lot of these trial and error methods so that you keep improving on the margins, right? Evolution of PPPs in DepEd. So this is my message to my good friend Usec Mike. This is what you worked on during your time in DepEd 13 years ago. Agreements to reach scale and drive down costs, that is still in place. Multi-administration investment commitments. This is a big thing then. It's still a big thing now. Unfortunately, Usec Mike, they stopped pushing PPPs for 13 years. But let me just share with you that all of the PPPs that Usec Mike put in place were fully paid, except for those that had problems with the contract or the structure. So that one is being settled already. Financing and risk management structure. So this is part also of the advantage of PPPs and seen as an advantage of the private sector. So right now we're exploring, for instance, on the interconnected device use that we're working on. The price of microchips are exploding right now because of the many things that are happening in the world. And we in government we can probably forecast what some of these prices are, but we will probably not beat the private sector in terms of forecasting them better for us. So if they're able to manage some of those risks better than government, that's the advantage that we want to bring into the equation. The next generation PPPs, I'm happy to report to my former boss, Usec Mike, balancing with conventional procurement. So right now, the two are in play. And as I just described to you earlier, there are now 6 horses in the horse race to produce classrooms. I told you 4+1, leasing and acquisition, PPPs, conventional procurement, donations, and so on and so forth. Vertical integration with focus on service level agreements. Now this, we feel, is the main game changer. If this manages to be introduced, and we're going to try and push it within the year, and get that in place, it will be a new breed of PPPs, much different from anything I'm told by Usec Riza of PPP Center, anything that is in play in any of the other agencies. Because we are not looking for infra, we're looking for a service output for the PPP. 1 hour of interconnected device use per week per child for every learner from grades 4 to 12. That's the goal, right? And whichever coalition or whichever consortium produces that at the least possible cost is the one we want to work with. And we feel they're going to beat government any day of the week. Because that is the strength of the private sector. And they're already doing it. In fact, the BPOs, that's what they're doing. If the megabits per second is somehow down, they don't get paid. Right? So they need to maintain the level of service quality. Good governance and transparency practices. I think we're strengthening that even further now with the new breed of PPPs. We're going to form advisory groups to see what we're working on and to practice more transparency. In fact, in the negotiation of some of our PPPs, we created a transparency portal in DepEd. Anything I share with one set of proponents, I share with the world. So one proponent asks for a copy of this or this or this. We post it, I send it, and then we post it there on the website so that all of the other proponents can also access the information. And finally, localized, regionalized PPPs. Now, I just want to end with that thought that perhaps the future of PPPs also is to equip not just central government, but the local governments with this particular modality so they can move ahead quickly on some of the service-oriented PPPs that we can start to develop, and it need not be central all the time doing it. We don't need to wait for central, that's what I'm saying. One example, which I just came back from Basilan, and I'm talking to some young leaders there, uh, exploring whether we can have a local PPP focused on nutrition, focused on school feeding. The idea behind this is simple. Rather than central creating a school feeding PPP for the entire country, right? The province of Basilan can explore at their own level, at the local level, putting together all those, let's say, small food producers in the area, yung mga karinderya po, tsaka mga restaurant, and then opening that up to supplying any number of schools for hot meals. And if they're able to support these small and medium-scale enterprises, we are not only strengthening the economy of Basilan, we're also strengthening the quality of school feeding in that part of the country. Basilan, as you know, has one of the most egregious stunting rates for learners based on their most recent data. So they really need to ramp up school feeding in that area. The other part of it, and I'll end with this thought, is to also organize the farmers so that they produce more food who will surely then be consumed by this contract that we are thinking of developing for the province of Basilan. So there is a consortium of local carinderias, for the lack of a better word, and then a consortium of farmers, and then a group of schools that will be paying for that continuous service, which is hot meals, for X days a year. So that's the sort of maybe a third generation PPP that we are now trying to develop at the localized level, which we hope will have legs soon. So with that, I think I don't have any more slides. Oh, I have this one last slide. I'm obligated to show it everywhere I go to give you a sense of the accomplishments of the Angara term in DepEd, our reform team. It's a much longer list than this, but I'm going to put here some of the bigger numbers and bigger impact accomplishments. This is our reform, right? The 5-point reform agenda. I was there when this was crafted. And what Seksani wanted was an easy to communicate strategy that the president would also support fully. And this is what we came up with, and the president really liked it, and that's what we're focused the last year and 10 months, and hopefully until the end of our term. Hopefully convincing the next administration to build on this. You don't need to reinvent the wheel because this seems to be working, as I will show you. So first is high-performing teachers. Take care of your teachers. That's what the president told us, and that we have been working on. Second is learners' physical and mental well-being. So we're looking at that and taking care of them. That's why anti-bullying is one of the big things we're working on as well. Efficient and supportive governance structure. So Seksani calls this trains on time. When we arrived, there was a year, actually it was last year, only 99 classrooms was turned over to DepEd. Imagine our deficit is 165,000 po, and only 99 was turned over to DepEd. So wala, nag-check out na po ako, hindi pa natin napunan po yung deficit na yan. Baka isa po sa mga bata yung Usec na, hindi pa rin natin napunan. So at that speed, we're not going anywhere. So we really need to dramatically ramp it up. So that's the trains on time. Also, textbook procurement, mostly delayed when we arrived. Now it is actually ramping up in a very big way. Empowered and employable Filipinos after high-quality education is the ultimate goal. And we're told this is the first time in the Department of Education that we actually clarified that our goal is empowered and employable Filipinos. So we are working directly with the economic team that our responsibility does not just end with graduation. We want to see whether they actually got jobs. And if they did not get jobs, then what are the areas for improvement in our curriculum, in our partnerships with the private sector, in our internships, and all of these things, because that's the kind of synergy we need to create those employable Filipinos. So anyway, some good news: 328 low-income barangays receive funding on child development centers. This is what we need to strengthen yung until 5 years old, 6 years old, before they join DepEd. They need to be, so the parents who might be working, mother and father, need to leave their children in a child development center so that those kids continue to learn even before they join our schools as kinder and grade 1. Starting school year 25-26, all schools will implement universal feeding for kinder learners. That's the first time DepEd is doing this. And our hope is that we ramp up progressively in Key Stage 1. Not just kinder, but grade 1, grade 2, and so on and so forth. Teacher benefits are up, medical allowance, overtime pay, 6K salary subsidy for 55,000 teachers, 5K supplies, and so on and so on. 100,000 teachers set to be promoted under the historic DepEd budget given to us this year. So we have many teacher ones who have not been promoted for 12 years. So imagine the demotivated teachers who have not been given the rightful promotion that they deserve. And they are now finally being promoted in the I guess in the tens of thousands, because recently you have very, very big numbers coming out of some of these provinces. So the goal now is to get all of these invested in so that we're able to give our teachers what they really deserve, because they really work hard. The hiring of 65,000 teaching and non-teaching personnel is a big, big help to those teachers. I met teachers who wake up at 4 a.m. because they still need to cook for the school feeding of his own learners. Bago po siya magturo, nagluluto pa siya to prepare the meal that the kids will be eating before he starts teaching his class. So hopefully soon, with the 65,000 teaching and non-teaching personnel, that will be a thing of the past. They will get the help that they need. And with our PPPs, including those that are exploring maybe nutrition and school feeding, should not be done by DepEd anymore. Maybe we can put that in a partnership with the private sector and the local government. ICT, connectivity, and all of these things, baka naman, maybe we shouldn't really rely on DepEd to be doing these things. Otherwise, the 1.2 million staff that I just started with, that will easily bloat into a bigger number if we try to do school feeding, ICT, EdTech, and all of these things. The constant pressure is to keep expanding. If you internalize all of these service provision, but why will you need to internalize it when the private sector can do it better at lower cost and at greater transparency? We can be good at teaching, full stop. That's really our business model anyway. That's our main mandate. Early RL results, and this one is really promising and really gives us a lot of encouragement. Literacy gains among 5.40 million learners. Ito po yung previously they were struggling readers and then they eventually graduate into higher levels of reading proficiency in as little as 20 days. So they're really able to improve based on RL and based on really basic po. They enunciate, I don't know if you've seen how a young person is taught how to read. Pero talagang I will not try to simulate it anymore, but you can just look at Meta and you will see what they're doing. So they're able to enunciate, and the faces of the young learners, that they're able to say English words, that they're able to read and comprehend it, is really quite powerful. 2,300 schools, 13,000 teachers, 760,000 students benefiting from Khan Academy with AI, which we want to ramp up. We feel this is part of the game changer for competitiveness of our graduates, and also a potential lever for catching up with other countries in our region. There naman, classroom building expanded 24,000 via 2026 GAA, 50,000 via PPP, so that's the one that gives me sleepless nights because I only got 16,000 approved so far. So marami pa pong laban, 34,000 pa. Please wish us luck. Historic DepEd budget, first time hitting 4% of GDP, which was our commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations in 2016 or 18, I believe, was when this commitment was made. Only now did we hit 4% of GDP. And then finally, Project Focus is also something produced by my young team, released 22 education datasets to boost transparency. So this is an unprecedented transparency in DepEd where we're releasing a lot of information, giving it to the stakeholders so that they themselves can analyze where their schools are, where their regions are. And you know, the first users of Project Bukas when we released it to the system and to the public, right? It was our own teachers. And they did not know that their performance was really that low in the entire system. So a lot of them appreciated that finally they know in this province, this is where my school is. In this region, in the country, this is where my school is. We do not want them to feel bad that their school is so low out of the 47,972. What we want them to do is to respond by saying, we need the resources to succeed. We need the support to succeed. When we pushed that reform, we met with any number of legislators. We went to Congress and quietly reached out to those legislators whose performance was not so good. And fortunately, we had a response that was not blaming people, rather focused on what are we going to do next to ramp up the investments and change that situation. So yun po yung best response po dyan sa transparency na yun. And finally, TVET integration to boost employability. We have really good ties with CHED and TESA right now. 170,909 learners benefiting from free TVET certification. So some of the tests are actually for a fee, and now we're giving them access to it. Free TVET certification. Senior high school graduates are now qualified to take eligibility exams for first-level government jobs. So this was also a big reform. And we needed to put our money where our mouth is. If we want the private sector to hire our senior high school graduates, then we needed to hire senior high school graduates in DepEd also. And demonstrate that we can integrate them into our workforce. We don't need to always discriminate and say, I'm going to hire if you have college years or some college or yung practice right now. This is still a big culture change and business practice change that we're pushing in the country. Understandably, it's going to be challenging because there is a labor surplus. They're always going to look for those with extra skills or perceived extra capabilities. What we need to show them is even with just a senior high school degree, that learner, that kid will be very competitive and will get your job done. You don't need to look for high school plus 2 years college. That kid from our system produced out of these reforms will be more than enough for what you need. So that's the goal for that reform. I'll end here and welcome any questions, comments, or reactions. Thank you.